Crazy Stupid Podcast.
If this is your first time tuning in, we'd love it if you could hit that subscribe button and hit the notification button so that you know when we are posting things, because we are the most important thing in your life. All right, so we just finished watching Logan. I guess I was sort of inspired to rewatch it because there was so much conversation about Across the Spider-Verse and where does it list? Where does it rank? Is it at the top of the list? And everyone was like, all right, it's up there with Logan or at least better. That's sort of where they sort of landed it. That and Infinity War, obviously. So I really wanted to see how well does this one age?
I've seen the film, I think, like 4 times now.
Yeah.
But this round, one of the things that I was top of the mind was that I realized in my mind before this last rewatch, this was like a post-apocalyptic film because it has that vibe. But when you watch it, it's actually not. Mm-hmm. Like the world is actually fine.
They've moved
just
on.
Like this specific group of people that we have grown to love and care about who are living in like their own sort of apocalypse while the rest of the world just keeps going.
Yeah.
And it reminded me of I feel like we had this conversation a while ago, but it was about how like when we talk about apocalyptic events or like the world ending, it's like we talk about them in a way that like world ending events don't really count until they impact the people that we think of as the least expendable. So we don't think about apocalypses as like for real until like, you know, our like the American capitalist system as we know it is crashing and et cetera. But there are like world ending events happening for people around the world like all the time. Yeah. Like I think about this like when we think about climate change, how in America we're in like a what can we do to prevent this or slow this down, but like in other places of the world it's like it's already here. Like it's already happening. And I feel like this film did a really good job of just sort of holding those two realities of that like the world actually is normal for most people, right? Like in all the settings that we go to, everything is essentially fine, but it feels very like end of the world because for this group of people, everything that they know and care about is gone.
The mutants.
Yes. Yeah. Like it's all gone. So that was the first thing. And then I started thinking about that idea of like people who we think of as like quote unquote expendable and people who we don't, and how in the film they make a point to show those groups of people. So like for one, the first heroes in the film are actually the Mexican nurses at that place who choose to, you know, band together and try to save these kids. Mm-hmm. And like nurses, you know, service workers in general, I think they're like a very overlooked group of people, especially like pre-pandemic. Like now we're all like nurses are heroes, nurses are heroes. But like pre-pandemic, nobody was talking about nurses. Okay. Mm-hmm. Like people really were not thinking about them. One, but two, they made a point to make them Mexican in the year 2017.
Yeah.
And they also made a point to say that they're, you know, like they're poor, like they're essentially like people that society's not really caring for or looking out for. Then they also, you know, talk about how the women who were used to create these mutants were poor Mexican women as well. And so you already start off with these two groups of people, and what ends up happening is that they band together and they're defiant against this big corporation. And in the end, they end up paying the ultimate price, essentially, which is like they die.
Yeah.
And then they introduce the black family. And the black family is like, they're black farmers, and they are up against a big corporation as well that's trying to buy out their land. And again, they stand together. They are defiant against that. And in the end, they also pay the ultimate price. And I felt sort of like just a reminder of like who X-Men and mutants are supposed to represent, because like that story is also reminiscent of what happened to the X-Men in this universe, which is like they were a group of people who were being exploited, who were being hurt, and they stood together and stood against it. And in the end, they also like paid the ultimate price. Essentially, like all of them died. And then you have these children, and it's like the same thing, like this cycle that keeps happening to these people. And so it just sort of made me think like, just what that is saying in and of itself, but then also the idea that all of these groups of people, when they stood up against these systems and these corporations or governments or whatever, they did it in community, like every single time. The nurses banded together with each other to fight against this. The children banded together against this corporation. The X-Men banded together against, right? And then there's like these little moments in the film where Professor X is talking about community and family to Logan. And you have Logan, a character who like essentially his entire his baseline emotion has always been like this like sort of animalistic rage, right? Like when he fights, when he whatever, like there's just always something sort of bubbling under the surface. But in the film, we explore like different versions of Logan and like what sort of activates that rage. So like you have the Logan that we know who found community and then essentially lost it. And then you have the clone Logan who will never know community at all. And then you have Logan's daughter, who, I mean, is not Logan, but like is also sort of representing another version of him, who was like in search of her community. And the way that like their rage is all activated by like these different experiences. And for Logan, like his body literally deteriorates as he's losing community. Like at the beginning of the film, obviously like mutants are going extinct, and then Logan himself is like weakening, right? And then it hits like a pretty drastic point when Professor X dies. And it's not like directly because Professor X died, like obviously he got into a very big fight that left him injured. But still, it's kind of like his body is sort of like I don't know, like symbolizing this experience. So like Professor X dies and he literally hits like the brink of death, but then he has to sort of accept this new community with Laura, and she like essentially nurses him back to health. She brings him to the doctor, she drives so he can rest, and then he gets to this place and the community there nurses him back to health so that he is actually healthy. And then he decides that he's going to like force his body to become strong again so that he can protect this new community for Laura. And in the end, he sacrifices himself and his body so that she can have this community that he essentially got to experience when he was younger.
I remember, and this is in relation to the comment you made about like the least of these, right? And you brought up nurses and essential workers, right? That became a term that everybody sort of reflected on. But another thing that didn't always click for me is how we sort of normalized apocalypse for other people and just everyday life. So a huge economic thing that we saw was like the unemployment level for like all Americans, right? But part of the conversation that I remember seeing some political scientists were talking about is some of these numbers were already high for Black and brown people. We had just normalized that, and we didn't see unemployment as a severe issue until the numbers for white Americans started to reflect what it was like for Black and brown people. And it just sort of reminded me of, even in this instance, I kind of called back to Days of Future Past. They built those machines, and at a particular point, the initial purpose was to remove all the mutants, but those machines ended up turning on everyone. You don't call it an apocalypse until everyone's involved, but from the mutants' perspective, they were living that fear literally their entire existence.
Yeah.
And it just kind of reminded me how kind of what you were pointing at we don't ever label it as an apocalypse until a privileged group is experiencing suffering, and that they made that point very clear.
Even in like smaller ways, like in the movie when the clone Logan is going crazy at the family's house, when he's killing that black family, Dr. Rice is in the van like, oh, he's magnificent.
Yeah, he doesn't.
And then when the white farmers show up and Logan starts killing them, then he's like, wait, we need to intervene. They're not saying it outright, but they're letting it be a factor in the film to bring the allegory to life just a little bit more.
Yeah.
You know?
As I'm rewatching Logan, I'm realizing that Magneto was right all along. And you can argue his tactics, would they have contributed or not? But at its core, he is 100% correct. And I remember when we were rewatching First Class, when Magneto asks Xavier, are you so blinded that you don't think they would try to fight their own extinction? And in every single X-Men film that we've had, starting all the way back in like 2000, right? That is the common theme that we have seen show up in every single film. The first one, definitely in First Class, in Days of Future Past, and what's implied with what happened to the mutants in Logan. Every single instance, you found the humans finding new ways to combat their survival. Even in X3, where they were using the mutant girl to create, they would call it like a vaccine to cure people of their mutant gene. Like I think at one point, Rogue used it because, you know, she wanted to be able to touch her boyfriend. So it really hits it home for what Magneto represents and how that fear is legitimate and justified, not in the sense of like the morality behind the violence he ensues is not correct, but
Sometimes it is.
Okay, you know what I mean? Because it's like I'm thinking Black Panthers.
Indiscriminate.
I'm like
the only issue.
By any means necessary. Sometimes it's like
the issue with him is that he's indiscriminate with it.
Yeah.
He's not always like, these people are not actively harming me, but these people are. Like sometimes he's just like, y'all all gotta
sure.
go.
I think that's part of my concern with Charles Xavier. He has this optimism that is addictive, but when you sort of apply it to the real world, like you don't get your freedom from oppressors by trying to like appeal to their empathy. If they had empathy, there wouldn't be these structural barriers to begin with, at least to you and your group of people. And I feel like there was a lot of that with Xavier throughout the X-Men films, and even sometimes in the comics, where I understand his motive behind it, but I do think there are some times where I think his empathy is becoming a bit of a blind spot, where like there are moments where Eric is like, you can't be this dumb.
Yeah.
Even in Dark Phoenix, he's like, you're always talking, Charles, but no one cares anymore. Like he was over it at that point. And that's just, it's hard for me to not look back and be like, Magneto was right from the jump.
It also makes his absence in this film like even more like pressing.
Just clicks me that he's probably dead.
Yeah, he's dead. I mean, well, they said, first of all, 7 X-Men died when Professor X had that seizure.
Who were the 7? I gotta know.
I mean, it's gotta be like the big ones, because Storm is dead. She's not there. Jean Grey is dead. Cyclops is dead. Like, all these people, you know, like, it's gotta be them because they're not here, and they would be here with Logan and Professor X if they were alive.
Magneto would have to be in that group because he said unspeakable, and that's his closest friend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't really see any other way that they could be dead, because they like don't really die. Like they live a long time. Like they don't die of old age, you know. So like
they could, some of them do.
Oh.
Yeah, we just never got to that point in their story. It's really just Logan that lives long.
Oh, so I guess maybe that could be it too. But it hasn't been that long.
I think so. Yeah, if he's alive.
I mean, Magneto could have died from old age, but
I doubt it.
But like I mean, because they are old. But the other
I don't
ones are
see
not
him
old.
getting that happy ending, which is kind of tragic.
Yeah.
We sort of bring this conversation up all the time, how the representation of who you cast is going to change how the viewer interprets the film. You cast all these people of color and you casting a lot of these Mexicans, and the story is about trying to get to another
border.
Yeah. This movie coming out in 2017 and the conversations we were having about immigration is a clear metaphor and allegory to how you should empathetically look at that conversation as a whole. If you are walking away from that film and not making that connection, I don't know what to tell you, because you started off with Mexicans, Mexican nurses. Hello, y'all. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I guess that was
the one thing that I was thinking about when they were doing this was I was like, so you guys didn't get any DNA from any female mutants, because she was like, their fathers were special seeds donated and their mothers were poor Mexican women. So that means that they only got DNA from male mutants.
Yeah, I guess they only needed like the semen. That's probably what they were going with. So, what does that mean? Do they just not care about the, women mutants? They just...
Seems wild to me when you got somebody like Jean Grey.
Also, you can't control nothing like that, though. They probably is too much. But they did use Mystique in Days of Future Past, though, to build the machines.
The machines. When did they get all these people's DNA?
There was a sense of doom all throughout this film of like, yo, they're putting stuff in the food and the water. Like, that is like literal genocide.
And it also just shows how people looked at mutants, because the fact that like an entire, essentially a race of people were wiped out. The people, maybe the public probably did not know why.
No, because remember in the newspaper, there's a thing where it said researchers can't understand the decrease of mutant population. So I don't think they fully knew.
But the fact that like an entire race of people just kind of like dwindled off and the world was just like, I don't know.
But it sounded like the conspiracy theorists were out there. Remember when Logan's listening to the radio and the guy tunes in and he's saying the water, the mutants, it's all connected. And then the radio host was like, why are we still talking about mutants? That was over 25 years ago. So I think it's implied that people are making the connection that the government played some role in the depopulation of the mutants. But it's just kind of like, you can't really prove it, This is another thing that I noticed. The use of comics in Logan, I thought, was very interesting. And they did it in two ways. The first was the children sort of see these as like almost mythical, right? And, even in that last scene when they're burying Logan, one of the kids has a toy Wolverine that he's holding on to. And so they're clearly looking up to a lot of these X-Men as like the way we look up to like civil rights activists, right? The second thing that I thought was interesting is a lot of the history gets misrepresented. And I think it's due to the fact that they were not written by mutants.
Yeah.
And you can clearly see how that's played out in the real world. I remember when I first got to college, and that was also sort of in the rise of like social media and Twitter blowing up. And I remember feeling so overwhelmed with the amount of Black historical information that I was receiving in just a span of like a year and a half. And I was just like, wait, what? Like, I'm blown away at how things were written so inaccurately.
Yeah. The biggest one for me, this was pre-college, but when I learned the real story of Rosa Parks, I was like,
yeah,
so she wasn't just tired and old on a bus?
No. There's
what?
There's that.
She was a young woman who did this intentionally.
Selma, watching that, you're just like, there's no way. Or even, more recently, like Judas and the Black Messiah, the holistic and nuanced perspective that they gave on that, you're walking away like, this, what were we learning? Or even just the horrors of slavery. You're just learning like there was so much dark stuff happening that you just never learn. You just never learn. And you can see how triggering it is for Logan, because he's like, half of this stuff is BS. It never happened the way that it did. And it was a lot darker and a lot more violent, and a lot more people died than the way that they're trying to present it in this very whitewashed version that they're giving it to you as kids to read.
Yeah, that's a good parallel. I didn't see that. That's good.
And that was something I was just like, whew, they're in love with these characters, and they should be, but there is also this side of, it didn't really go down like that. I guess there were a few other things. We sort of touched on a number of it already. This one was just a bit of like a shout out. Someone like Charles Xavier having a mental illness is terrifying. I'm sorry. Like, they really showed the scope of how powerful Charles Xavier is. What he could essentially do to the entire world if he wanted to.
I also think, though, that was another way to introduce another group of people that is represented by the X-Men, because the elderly and people who are mentally unwell, people who can't care for themselves anymore, are often cast aside and discarded. And when you think about the way Professor X was the X-Men.
Yeah, it was sad to see him like that.
Right? Like, he's the guy. Like, he was, I'm sure there was people in the world who were afraid of him, or etc., but he also was a great ally. Mm-hmm. He was working with the government. He was doing his best to sort of mend these two, perspectives. And to see like where he is now, and the way that he sort of has just been cast aside because he's essentially no longer useful to them, is very reminiscent of like what happens to real live elderly people, but also just people with debilitating mental illness in general, who are like it's people that society essentially doesn't know what to do with. But like in real life, there's people that like we don't know, like people, like society just genuinely doesn't know what to do, and I feel like also doesn't care to learn.
One of the things that I really appreciated in this film is Logan really encapsulates the relationship that Xavier and Wolverine have, and how that for many years was the core of the X-Men franchise. And because their Wolverine's story essentially starts with him, and it ends in a way with him. Yeah. And the struggle between the two of them really embodies the message of like what it means for community and coalition building for marginalized groups of people, and that you can't fight this on your own. And you see this tug and pull happening between Charles and Logan in a way that, for me, I feel like was a lot more personal and intimate, and it hits harder than the relationship with him and Magneto.
Because it feels familial in this film in a way that it has not in the past.
Right, yes. Exactly. It embodies the story of X-Men perfectly. And I don't know if even the creators realized that they had something special there throughout the entire franchise so far.
Yeah, I feel like it's like this film feels like they really realized it.
Yeah, finally.
This just goes to show, though, listen, you have to ground your stories in relationships between people. I don't care what kind of story you're telling. It can be action, adventure, drama. It doesn't matter. You need the heart of the story needs to be the connections between the people. It's the only way to add depth, okay? I'll go watch other movies, okay? And I'll have a good time. I will. But the ones that stick with you are those ones.
Hell yeah.
That's why Guardians 3 hit so hard. That's why Across the Spider-Verse hit so hard.
Even Wakanda Forever.
Wakanda Forever. Like, you gotta make it about that.
And I remember the directors and writers for Across the Spider-Verse, they talked about that, where they said superhero fatigue does not exist, but a film cannot be sustainable and durable with just action scenes, cameos, and Easter eggs.
No.
It's not enough anymore. It's not enough anymore.
You gotta add some weight to it, and it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have to be overbearing. It doesn't it doesn't have to be as dark as Logan or
Right.
but it's gotta have something.
Yeah, Guardians was never dark. All three of them. I mean, the third one was a little bit darker, but the first two, you feel it though.
Mm-hmm.
You feel it. And I remember them bringing this up of like they did some test screenings for the second film in Across the Spider-Verse, and a lot of people who saw it, like some of the producers were like, I mean, you got to get more cameos in there because that's what people are looking for. And it's like, I actually don't think so.
No.
Those aren't the ones that get remembered, even for the fans that don't realize it yet. Those are not the ones that keep you coming back to watching the film. You might watch a couple of those action scenes on YouTube, but sitting down and watching the film, what keeps you in it, it's those relationship moments.
Yeah. Do you think that bringing back Hugh Jackman cheapens the ending of this movie?
I don't think so. I guess it depends on what they do with him. If this is just a final thing, because he always wanted to have moments in the MCU, that was like a thing on his checklist that he always wanted, and he wanted to do a film with Ryan Reynolds. Things just didn't always work out. I'm happy for him, and as a Marvel fan, I would love to see him interact with some of the characters. Like, he's supposed to interact with Hulk. Like, that's like a big thing, you know? And so to see him do that in my fandom head supersedes it. And I think what they did with Charles, I don't think it, in Doctor Strange, it still hits home in Logan for me. I don't think seeing him in Multiverse of Madness didn't ruin it for me. I guess it depends on what they do with Logan. They have to really sell it home that this isn't the one that we've come to know. If they can convince me of that, then I think I'll be okay. Yeah. Why? Was that something that you were considering?
Yeah, I feel like multiverse is cool, multiverse is fun, multiverse is grand.
Yeah.
And I am excited to see Hugh Jackman. But when I rewatched this film, I was kind of like this, like when we first watched it and it was like, and this is the end. Like Hugh Jackman's not reprising this role. Like, it's a real send-off. It's a real farewell. Like, it felt final. Now it's not as final. And I don't know if it necessarily cheapens it. I don't know. But, like, I think you're right because it does kind of depend how they go about it. But, like, it does undo a little bit of the finality of this film.
So would you would feel uncomfortable with RDJ and Chris Evans cameos also? I guess it all depends, really.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. I'm interested to see how they handle it.
I think cameo is different than like you are a character in this movie.
Yeah, it seems like he's going to have a lot of screen time in Deadpool 3.
Yeah.
It seems like he's having a lot of fun.
Yeah, and again,
Like
I am happy for him, and I am excited. But I do think it does just a smidge, just a little bit of that finality is now
I feel like
gone.
some of it was like, yeah, I'm ready to let this character go because like y'all aren't taking us anywhere. But at least with the MCU, like we're going somewhere, you know. Last thing was related to Professor X. So this film is definitely very heavily influenced by like Westerns, right? And there's that scene when they're in the hotel of the casino and they're watching that Western, and Xavier's talking with Laura and he's sharing this story about like what the Western's about. The Western is called Charles. It came out in 1953. So
isn't it called Shane?
Shane, sorry, I read that wrong. The Western is called Shane, and it comes out in 1953. Apparently, that entire conversation with Charles, Xavier, and Laura was all improvised by Patrick Stewart. Sir Patrick Stewart, because that was the first film he saw in the theater growing up. And so that film was like very dear to him. And so he sort of improvised that entire scene with them.
Love that.
And it was so precious they kept that in the film.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's good stuff.
Yeah. Okay, I think that covers everything on my end. Anything else that popped up for you?
No, I don't think so. Just real, I mean, phenomenal. I cry every time.
Yeah, it's still in the S tier, bro.
When she takes that doggone T, that
Turns into an
I
X.
call it a T. The cross. She takes the cross. It turns it into an X. Waterworks.
Mm-hmm.
It's beautiful.
It's good. It's good. All right, so we've got 2 documentaries that we also watched.
Shiny Happy People is about the Duggar family. You remember in 19 and Counting? It was like, they were kind of like a big deal. There was like this reality show about this white family that had 19 kids.
Oh.
Those are the Duggars.
Yes.
Okay? Now, the Duggars, unbeknownst to me as a child, are apparently a part of a very, very, very conservative evangelical right movement. It's called IBRT, but I can't remember what it stands for. And essentially, it's a cult.
Oh, boy.
But it didn't get flagged as a cult to like the American public because it doesn't function the way we're used to cults functioning. Like, there's no compound. They're not all in one centralized location. Essentially, it's like this idea, this ideology that's like hyper patriarchal, and it's like they turn the fathers in every household as like these essentially like authoritarian leaders. Like, you just do whatever they say. And
why does it sound like extremist Mormons?
it does have some overlaps there. Also, though, it does bear some resemblance to very conservative Adventists. Here are some things. Number one,
Oh, dear.
they are very heavy on the homeschooling. So watching that back to back after watching the Hillsong documentary, there's just a lot of overlap, and it makes you kind of nervous for like just society at large and our ability to think critically about the things that we intake. Because the Duggar family, 19 and Counting, that was extremely popular reality TV for several years.
Yeah.
And even when it came out, I don't know if you remember, but while that show was going on, it came out that the son of the family was essentially a pedophile and was inappropriately touching his sisters. That was like a big story. Like that was like, it went public. They did like a 60 Minutes interview, like the family.
Ugh.
Okay, like, and the show continued
No.
with the daughters.
Oh, okay.
What's happening in the documentary is like you're talking to the Duggar family, like not like the parents, but like some of the daughters who grew up and are now like not a part of this. And also you're talking to other people whose families followed the same ideology, who many of them were subject to different kinds of abuse, many, just like lots of things. And they're explaining how like they're watching as children or like young adults or whatever, they're watching 19 and Counting become like this very popular cultural phenomenon. They're getting invited onto like, not like little talk shows, like the morning news type thing, right? Like they're sitting down with like famous people. They're getting lots of attention. It's like this huge thing. They're watching this and they're like, oh, actually, no, like I know what this is. This is what I grew up on, and this is bad. Like, this is very harmful. This is very dangerous ideology. And it's kind of like the same thing, like the way that the Hillsong documentary was like, it was sort of like a Trojan horse. Like, you are putting on this nice, like, shiny, happy, I said shiny happy, that's the name of the documentary, but like you're putting on this like facade that looks very safe and harmless, and behind it are all of these ideals that are extreme and that many people would disagree with. But society at large just doesn't look that closely at things. And so we give them these huge platforms, and every time people end up getting hurt. Happened with Hillsong, it happened with the Duggar family, and they even talk about how like this IBRT thing. So like essentially what that show 19 and Counting did is it gave a national platform to this very specific thing. So they're like extremely pro-life. Like, like obviously like they keep having kids, right? Like they're not for abortion. That's like the whole thing of the show is like they keep having kids. But also they started this thing called the Joshua generation, where they would take and this actually I listened to a podcast today that was about the Dobbs decision, and they interviewed somebody that was part of the Joshua generation.
Oh my God.
The Joshua generation is this thing where they would take their homeschooled children, and then they created these like programs that were supposed to teach them civics, politics, debate tactics, etc., with the intent to create a generation of people that hold these ultra conservative beliefs and prepare them to enter political office.
Yeah.
And that happened.
Yeah.
Like,
No.
it happened.
100%.
And so it's just crazy to me, and it just makes me concerned. And like the main thing I came away with after watching both those documentaries was just we just got to be way more critical and ask more questions and look a bit more closely at all the things that we take in. And that's why, like, you know, sometimes people get annoyed like with Gen Z or like, you know, hyper online people, etc., because they feel like they, you know, like they do too much, like let people enjoy things, like blah, 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 blah. And I get it. I get like that too. But sometimes that hypervigilance is not bad. And I would prefer that we err on the side of doing too much than doing too little, because the fallout of both of these, you know, extremely popular cultural phenomena
Who cares?
was very damaging to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And like nobody was paying attention until years later.
Even with the Hillsong one, the only reason why people started to have that closer examination was with when the gay guy decided to go on, was it Survivor? If he doesn't go on there, how long can they put up that facade of them being a very affirming, inclusive, and all welcoming community? You know what I mean? Like, we weren't examining Hillsong at all. And I remember when that became like a really huge deal. I would see their videos and their worship structure. They're in this like acoustic, gorgeous room with like the Christmas lights hanging down, and they're dressed in like their kind of nice casual clothes. They look super retro and modern. And like, it was like modern, cool Christians singing songs that are very like aesthetically pleasing. The lyrics hit very home. Why would I need to examine them any further? It's telling me the aesthetics. It's like we made the mistake of assuming that their aesthetics told us everything about their theology, when that was not the case at all.
Yeah, and it never is.
Yeah.
Listen, it's not bad. Even when it's frustrating, even when it's like we're tired of always having to analyze everything and not being able to just relax and enjoy things, it's not bad to have a discussion about what could possibly be lying under the surface of the things that you take in. And you don't have to come out agreeing with everything, but to have the conversation and to do the digging, I think is important. And I mean, I think about this with, we've talked about Attack on Titan, and like, you know, there was an article that I read about that where like the last line just sort of hit home for me. That was like, basically the article saying it's a very balanced article, just kind of laying out the facts of like how these things could be interpreted, right? And it's saying it's a great show, but in the end, it's like, it's worth asking, like, is this a message that you want to be taking in? Like, is this something that you want to be, you know, absorbing? And it's the same thing, like, even when you talk about Marvel and then, you know, people bring out the military propaganda and all of that stuff, it's like, it's not bad to just say, let's just discuss it and let's just look a little deeper and let's not just turn a blind eye, because sometimes things just aren't what they seem, and it's not everything, and it's not all the time, and it's not everything to the same degree. It's not like everything is gonna, you know, be the Duggar family cult or, you know, but like, just pause and like have the conversation, Because just because I know something that I used to say a lot was like, I mean, I know people say that like that's what they're trying to say, but like to me, that's not what it means. So like, it's not harming me. Cool, that could be true, but what idea are you giving platform to that to somebody else could be interpreted the way that it's intended to be interpreted?
Right.
And it also just like, you got to think too about like the access that it gives to the people behind the scenes, right? Like, even if Hillsong itself did not have any problems, right? Like, even if the Hillsong church was like, cool, fine, chilling, great. None of the weird, abuse scandals and the racism and all that stuff, even if none of that was going on, the people in charge are using this platform to be given access to spaces that give them more power in decision making, right? Like, it's just worth thinking about, man. It's just not bad to talk about it. To end on a lighter note.
There we go.
I'm very late watching this show, okay? The whole discussion on this online happened several weeks ago. But it is delightful. It is so good. It's like, it's funny in the exact same way that like The Office, Parks and Rec, Abbott Elementary, Superstore, it's funny in the exact same way. It's just like a cast of just absolutely absurd people, okay? And it just makes it great. But when you add in that little element of that one person in the room that thinks all of this is real, oh my gosh. It just makes everything funnier, because every time something wild happens, you're already laughing just because it's like, oh, that was a funny joke, right? Like, oh, good on the actor or the writers or whatever, right? Then the camera pans to the dude that thinks it's all for real, and you're like, oh my gosh, like, to him, this is just like real life. Like, he has no idea, and it makes it so much funnier. I was laughing out loud, like screaming, crying, laughing at multiple points. It's so funny. It's so funny. And then also it's like so endearing, because the guy, his name is Ronald, which, first of all, I just have to, Ronald, what prayer did you pray? Because just imagine that you go to jury duty, you spend a week there, and by the end you're friends with James Marsden. Yeah. You're going to get coffee? That's crazy.
Yeah.
But he's just like such a good person. Like, he's just like a genuinely good guy. And so like the way that they sort of land the whole thing, I don't know. I mean, it's not really a spoiler if you're.
No, I do want to watch it now.
Oh, so
you sold it to me. You can't do it after that.
Okay. But he's just a very like a genuinely wonderful person. And like at any point when like, it would be like very rational to respond to this a bit differently, than with a little less grace than he did. Never. He just is it's just actually so delightful. So funny and so great. So, and just honestly, major props to the creators of this show. Like, that is an ingenious idea. And they, in the last episode, they kind of show you kind of what they had to do to make it all work. And it's kind of mind blowing, like how much of this was just dependent on chance, was just dependent on like just the right thing happening in the right way. And all of these actors just having to like really play off of the moment and figure things out, because like, it's not like heavily scripted, but they do have like a way that they want the story to go, but a lot of it is dependent on Ronald and how he responds, and he's the one factor that they can't predict. So, I mean, just masterful planning, and frankly, once in a lifetime. Like, I don't think you can replicate this experience ever again, because now that it's happened and it's been hugely popular, it's like, you can't really try again now. Like, it's kind of done. Like, maybe you could.
You mean like another show trying it, or them coming back?
Them coming back. Like, maybe you could, like, but it can't be jury duty. And, and like, you have to, I mean, like, a whole new cast of people, like, everything. But, just so good. I would watch it all again. It's so funny. So funny.
That takes us to the end of our episode. We appreciate you all. If there are any of you that watched this to the end, we got love for y'all. I want to thank you all again, and we will see you next time. Peace out, everyone. Oh my gosh, that cat.